What if the biggest opportunities for sustainability aren't the things we're seeing, but the ones that we don't? Stay tuned to discover what I'm talking about in this episode of the Green New Perspective podcast. Hey friends, you're watching the fresh episode of the Green New Perspective podcast. If you're watching our show regularly, then you know that we'll bring you information from the future tech industries, and we'll talk about marketing strategies that are fueling growth in this space. If you're new to the channel, click that subscribe button to hear the latest news from innovators in the US. The most powerful sustainability upgrades are probably the ones you'll never see. They're hidden in the systems that keep our buildings running, and that's where my today's guests, Stephen Hall and Nate Bolton from Genesis AC, are making change. When we think about sustainability, we usually picture EVs, solar panels, wind turbines, so the things that we're seeing. But for Nathan Bolton, the real impact happens behind the walls and under our floors. Genesis AC, the company we are dedicating this episode to, is reimagining how life sciences spaces are built to be more efficient, resilient, and sustainable. So join the conversation to learn how they're driving the change from the inside out, I guess.
This episode of Green New Perspective is brought to you by New Perspective Marketing. For over 20 years, New Perspective has helped future-focused B2B tech companies grow by building thought leadership, attracting better qualified leads, and driving pipeline growth. If you're ready for smart strategies, measurable results, and a partner who's invested in your success, visit npws.com to learn more.
So for starters, I always let our guests introduce themselves and the company we're dedicating this episode to. So Stephen, can you start by giving us an overview of what Genesis is and the work that you do? And then Nate, you can continue with your role within the company.
Hello, my name is Stephen Hall, and I'm the Chief Process Engineer at Genesis AEC. We are an engineering and construction company based in the Philadelphia and Boston areas in the US. And what we do primarily is to design and construct facilities for the life science industry, such as cell therapy, active pharmaceutical ingredients, oral solid dosage products. And my role in the company is to oversee process engineering aspects. And I'm a chemical engineer by training, and I've been in this industry for throughout my entire career.
Nate Bolton, also with Genesis, obviously. And I am on the mechanical engineering side, so I help with the HVAC design and implementation for the facilities that Stephen had talked about.
And Stephen, why do you see facilities, the often invisible systems like water and energy, as one of the most powerful levers for sustainability?
In any kind of a building, the bones of the building are these invisible systems, such as steam, chilled water, especially the air conditioning systems, and also the utilities that feed into the process, like water for injection and pure steam. These are hidden from the basic fabric of the building. When you walk through the building, you don't really see or understand that they're just like in your house, but they're critical systems for ensuring stewardship of our energy and conservation of energy, heat, cooling, and even carbon footprint.
And Nate, when we talk about this, sustainability conversation, we were just mentioning the invisible stuff, which means that we often focus on the visible stuff, like let's say solar or EVs. So why is this behind the scenes, let's say infrastructure, just as critical? Can you explain that for our audience?
So it's actually it's sort of a double stack. So your visible systems, your solar, your wind power, your things like that, those are providing the energy to drive the systems in your facility. So if you have inefficient systems or less sustainable systems, you need more of those visible systems in order to be able to power what's in your building. So the invisible systems that are in your building, if you're able to sustainably utilize those, increase the efficiency, decrease your overall usage, then you need less of the visible systems in order to be able to drive it. So it's a win-win on both sides by decreasing the requirements of the building, but also decreasing the requirements of the visible systems and also arguably some of the more expensive systems that drive your building.
I could see us having a lot of energy recovery in the invisible systems where waste heat is utilized to preheat boiler feed water, for an example. And Nate, I'm sure you have some other thoughts on that.
Yeah, absolutely. I think probably one of the biggest things, and this kind of segues into some of the other segments, but one of the biggest things in all industries, not just pharma, is really identifying opportunities for we'll call it like first line reductions. In pharma, one of our biggest uses is airflow and the amount of conditioned air that's required in any given space, whether it's a lab space, whether it's an office space, whether it's, some other use space. And the more you're able to reduce your airflow required in that space, the more you're going to save and the more sustainable you're going to be able to create a system that kind of flows downhill from there. So utilizing that reduction first and foremost is probably one of the biggest opportunities to be sustainable prior to adding in other relatively expensive or complex systems for energy recovery, which is certainly, the next thing that you want to do. And then finally, any of the efficiency pickups that you can gain by using just simple, more efficient equipment itself. So the equivalent of like Energy Star for facility systems.
It's interesting that you brought up airflow, since that's one of the huge energy hogs in life sciences.
Mm-hmm.
And I think one of the things that we've learned recently is that careful control of humidity and temperature set points in the spaces that are responsive to the outside air humidity can make a huge difference in the amount of energy that's used in those systems. Because we, as humans, our comfort level is based not only on the sensible temperature in the space, but also the relative humidity. So when the relative humidity is higher, we can feel comfortable with a lower temperature in the space, and vice versa. And by using active automation and algorithms, we can optimize the amount of energy that's used to heat and cool those spaces without changing the airflow, which is sort of fixed in our environments.
And what would you say is one, let's say, common misconception companies have when it comes to making the systems more sustainable?
One of the misconceptions that we're running into, it's not really a misconception, but it's a disconnect between the top management of the major companies and the engineers that are actually working in the facilities, who are tasked with implementing grandiose objectives for sustainability. Because what's pitched in the corporate world is carbon, net zero carbon, and reduction of water consumption, et cetera, which don't always match with the technical capabilities or financial wherewithal of the individual plants and what their bottom lines allow. So what we're seeing is the plant engineers are responding to these demands without a fully, let's say, pushing back on what's realistic, and they will make decisions that are based on meeting the lofty goals, and those decisions may not be the most sustainable actions that they could be taking.
How to deal with those kind of challenges?
It's a people problem primarily.
Can you tell us more about the Pharma Water Pro and why it matters?
What Pharma Water Pro does is analyze water systems during the design for water purification for our pharmaceutical facilities. What we found is that there's a commonality across pretty much all of our clients, so that when they need purified water, and to make that purified water, there's certain technologies that can be used. Which one is the most appropriate for an individual system depends on factors like how much water is going to be consumed and what is the energy source for heating and cooling. And what our platform does is take those inputs into a model that we can quickly sort through the alternatives for them and come out with the answers for which is a more sustainable technologies to use for pretreatment and for water purification. The advantage of having this platform is that we have a stable set of assumptions that we can use. They can be modified on a case-by-case basis, but it gives us a leg up. We don't have to reinvent the wheel every time, and we're able to very, very quickly do these assessments to come to a preliminary and conceptual design basis to build our detailed designs on.
Can you give us an example where this approach or the tool itself changes the way client made decisions around water systems?
We have a client who currently uses multi-effect distillation to make their water for injection, or WFI. And by using our tool, we were able to show the advantage of switching that technology to a membrane-based system. It's not obvious whether or not membrane or multi-effect or vapor compression is the most economical, because there's factors like maintenance costs and the life cycle of these technologies. Membranes wear out more quickly than stainless steel distillation units. But using the tool, we're able to take those factors into account, get the input from the client. How long do they want to run the system for? How much spare capacity do they need? And show the differences in those consumptions. One thing I want to point out here is that in getting to net zero or carbon neutral, companies are relying on clean electricity. And that really isn't necessarily the case. In the United States, if you look at the energy maps across the country, what you find is that the carbon content of electricity varies widely from place to place. And it's only if you have truly renewable electrical sources that the carbon footprint of electricity is lower than, say, using natural gas, which isn't necessarily the reality on the ground, because you can say that you're buying clean electricity from the grid, so they tell you. I don't know how many times you can resell it.
But Nate, when we're talking about this energy side, do you have an example of a project that shows what's possible when facilities are reimagined for sustainability?
Yeah, I think the conversation around electrification is a huge piece. Being able to Stephen's point, as we transition away from fossil fuels being used on site, and being able to move to electrified systems, you're really starting to see a shift in how facilities utilize all of the equipment within the facility, as well as their HVAC systems that drive that equipment, to be a bit more sustainable, but also to provide a lot more control. So a good example is when companies use air source heat pumps on the exterior of their building to provide both heating and cooling simultaneously in some cases. That is a huge leg up, and as opposed to using, a chiller plant in one area of the building and then a gas-fired heating plant in another area of the building. And in some cases, they actually, fight against each other. So those are the types of opportunities that we're seeing, especially lately. And anytime we can see other opportunities for reduction, probably the biggest one that we see most often is through controls. Being able to come into a facility, and even if we don't do major capital project, being able to say, let's review your controls, let's review your sequence of operations for how your building is operating, how your equipment is operating, and being able to tweak that to a point where there's improvements to be made. That's a very quick software fix on a very inexpensive system that returns, immediately, essentially. And that payback oftentimes can help drive those larger, more visible projects and more electrified projects for facilities to be more sustainable.
And how does data and transparency help to build trust and accountability with the clients?
Yeah, the data. So the data it's tough. So data is only as good as where the data comes from, and it's only as good as the systems that you use to analyze it. So, when we talk about data, when we talk about controls, and we say, okay, this facility or this school or this office building or this apartment building, they have all of these unique control systems, and they're all of these very expensive controllers, when you come in and you say, okay, well, when's the last time anyone's looked at these? When's the last time anyone's replaced the sensor? When's the last time anybody's, kind of modified the background software and the controls for it? Ultimately, that's what's going to determine, the data quality that comes out of it. So there's a huge opportunity to be able to use data moving forward, across the board. Every time somebody turns on a light switch, every time a VAV box kicks on, every time a lab, somebody walks into a lab space and it recognizes that there's occupancy. All of that is good data as long as you can connect, as long as you can collect it accurately, and then you can utilize it accurately with the software.
Challenge, though, Nate, that we've run into is data overload, where one client is getting a lot of data in a form of monthly reports from their data acquisition system, but they don't have time to do anything with them and react. How do you see that going forward?
Yeah, the kind of back to the data quality software, the same as the data quality itself is what is the right data that you should be using? What's the right data that you should be looking at? It's very similar to like business KPIs. You could be measuring one thing, but that doesn't even remotely mean it's going to turn into something that you want it to. So being able to know exactly the information that you need and where it's coming from, and then ensure the quality of that information, that's going to determine, what you're able to do in your facility and how you're able to improve upon whatever. So, if you have a goal, if you have a sustainability goal, and you want to make sure that you meet those sustainability goals, it's very important to right off the bat understand what it is you're trying to measure and you're trying to reach, and then identifying all of the pieces, all of the data pieces that you're going to need in order to be able to get there, and how do you ensure that you're accurately tracking those data points on your way to success.
Did you know your win rate drops by 90% if a deal sits idle for 2 months? Sales cycles are dragging, buyers go silent, decision makers keep multiplying. This 20-minute webinar shares data-backed insights and clear tactics to revive momentum fast and keep it going. Don't let your best opportunities stall out. Watch on demand, link in the episode description, and take back control of your pipeline.
Usually when I talk with companies here on the podcast who are providing some sort of sustainable solution, there are two camps when we talk about their clients. We have the eager adopters and those who are worried about the cost. So how do you navigate that tension, Stephen?
That is a huge tension, and cost is a major driver. The economics of everything that we do generally wins out. There are times when cost has become no barrier, and companies have gone forward with projects that on a cost basis didn't make a lot of sense, but they were achieving water consumption or wastewater reduction goals that they could check off in terms of their achievements. But in general, what we're seeing, what I'm seeing is aggressive objectives and goals at the beginning of the project, and then when the costs come in, the projects either die or morph into something that's much different than what they started out to be. It's not something that Genesis has a lot of control over. It's our clients who are paying the bills, not only for our fees, but also for the capital investment and operating costs for the systems. And ultimately, it's totally up to them how they want to spend their money.
And what kind of trade-offs do they face when weighing cost against, let's say, carbon impact?
Trade-offs include not only the capital costs to put it in, but the risk of changing their technology from where they are today, because they can't accommodate business interruption that would be unexpected. So it's important to be able to, and I think Nate brought this point up before, they don't want to be early adopters necessarily to take that risk of a business interruption if the technology doesn't pan out the way they expect it to be. They also have to take not shortcuts, but They also have to make trade-offs between the optimal design and what is more easily implemented into their systems.
Nate, with all of this in mind, how would you say you help clients to shift their view from compliance costs to strategic investment?
Yeah, it's a very fine line. There's a lot of the compliance questions, and trying to thread the needle between what's required and what's available is oftentimes difficult. But that being said, oftentimes you can use some of those stringent requirements to your advantage when making the case for sustainability improvements. So, great example is going back to the airflow reduction. A lot of the airflow reduction in some of those systems, it actually helps increase quality because now you no longer have the potential for significant air movement in a space. You have the ability to better control the air and thus, the impact that it has on a given product at any given time. And then as a result, you're able to potentially see a better product, or at least a higher quality process that leads to a better product in the future. So sometimes they dovetail nicely in terms of the requirements and the sustainability goals. Other times they're I don't want to say in direct conflict. They don't dovetail very nicely. A good example is just the cleanliness requirements of air. It's still not entirely agreed upon to what extent the air needs to be cleaned in any given facility. There's differences in ISO classification, and Europe is trying to pull in different standards for their air classification. And so ultimately, I think that if there can be a marriage between what makes sense from a regulatory perspective and what is capable from a reduction perspective, I think you'll come to a much better place and a much better product at the end.
And how does Genesis AEC communicate its sustainability story in a way that resonates with both clients and the broader market? Steven?
What we're trying to do is to build case studies that showcase the successes that we've had. And we do those through our website and through a blog, as well as face-to-face meetings with potential clients to explain pretty much as Nate has been doing today as to what kind of trade-offs are possible and what achievements can be made.
And Nate, if you can imagine the facility of the future, let's say 10 years from now, what does it look like?
So I think that there's a case for a industrial version of the passive house certification where we're able to really see these very, very high efficiency designs, not systems, but designs that enable scientists and building owners to do very high quality work in very high quality spaces with, again, good data, with good systems, with facilities people who understand and are educated in the systems that they're trying to maintain, and that everyone kind of has an eye, every couple of weeks on the end goal of what it is that they're trying to do and how to do that in a sustainable way. I think when you look at it purely from a quarterly cost perspective, you kind of lose out on your facility and you say, okay, well, this facility can continue to run the way it's running for another 5 years. And then oftentimes that kind of drops off the question of, yeah, well, but should it? Are you sacrificing something else simply by, trying to maintain your cost efficiency in certain areas when, if you're able to spend a little bit more upfront for, say, better facade systems or better windows or something like that, or better mechanical systems, what is the impact on your processes, on your people, on your product, on everything that's downstream that would potentially last longer than that 5-year, we'll call it, deferral of costs for a project.
Steven, would you have something to add here?
It might be a slightly different topic here, but what I want to bring up is that we've talked a lot so far about what Genesis does and what our clients do. But what we haven't mentioned is that, especially in the major energy consumers, boilers, chillers, air compressors, those prime movers are often not owned, but they're managed by the vendors that supplied them. And that brings in another set of people or entities that conflict with each other. They each have their own set of goals, and they each have their own ideas on how to sustainably manage their systems. But if you take a boiler, for an example, and you have a boiler operator, and the boiler manufacturer maybe is providing the maintenance and operation of that boiler system, and then you have another group that says, oh, I can take water that's been rejected from my reverse osmosis system and use it as boiler feed water. You now have a conflict between wanting to send a different kind of a water to the boiler than the boiler operator expects. And there needs to be a dialogue there to make that achievable. If you want to use that same water as feed water to make up water, the cooling towers, and yet you have a cooling tower chemistry company that's carefully managing the quality of that water, and you introduce a water that's different than what they're used to seeing, and it may change its quality over the course of the year due to the outside weather. It could disrupt what they're trying to achieve, and maybe working across purposes here, the results would be less than ideal.
How do you think that we can achieve that sort of collaboration?
You need to have a broker, a project manager in essence, to recognize the contributions from each of these different entities and work with them collaboratively to bridge the gaps, which isn't necessarily very easy because they, as I said, they have their own ideas on how to go about it. In the case of a chemistry company for the cooling towers, they're out there to sell chemicals. And if you come up with strategies to reduce the quantity of chemicals that are required, you're going to run into resistance.
So would you say that we need a mindset shift across the industry to accelerate the sustainable transformation?
Yeah, we need the data collection, and we need the science behind this, and convincing arguments to show the advantages of making such changes.
And Nathan, when you think, what is the mindset shift you love to see across industries?
I think the biggest one is really just away from first cost. It's not just the initial dollar sign. Yes, there's sticker shock. That could be true for anything. But it's the analogy of a good pair of boots, a good pair of boots that costs $300 versus a bad pair of boots that costs $30. If the good pair of boots is going to last you 10 years, but the bad pair of boots, you have to continue to buy new ones every 6 months, then at the end of the day, you're going to end up spending more, you're going to have worse feet, and you're going to really pay for it in the long term. It's kind of that same idea. So if you're able to evaluate projects and evaluate work and sustainability, much broader perspective that includes more than just, what's this going to cost on our line item for this fiscal year, then you're going to be in a much better place. And that's going to really open up opportunities to do a lot more for your facilities and your people.
And for our audience, or members of our audience who are ready to make this shift and want to learn more about Genesis AEC, where they can get more information on the company and on both of you, where they can get in touch with you, maybe ask you more questions, of course, in the comments here in the podcast. But if they want to, write to you, DM you on social media or email you, can you share some info here?
Our corporate website is genesisaec.com. And from there, we have a sustainability page, which has a link to a description of Pharma Water Pro. We have a dedicated Pharma Water Pro email address. That inbox comes to me as well as a few others in our company. Of course, we have LinkedIn presence as well, both individually and corporately.
No, I think that covers it for us today.
Well, thank you both for being my guests here on the Green New Perspective podcast. Hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as I did.
Thank you very much.
Thank you for tuning in to Green New Perspective. This podcast is proudly sponsored by New Perspective. We are a Boston-based marketing agency working with Cleantech clients solely for over 20 years now. And if you want to check out how we help our Cleantech clients to grow, you can click on the link in the description of this episode. If you like what we do here with the podcast, giving some amazing people from all over the clean tech space a place where they can showcase their innovative tech aimed at combating climate change, you can support us in so many ways. You can leave reviews, comments, or consider subscribing to our channel on your favorite streaming platform. We've noticed that around 75% of you who are regularly watching our show are not subscribing. So just by hitting that subscribe button, you could help us to grow, to get even more people from the climate tech space and create additional content. So please consider doing that. Thank you in advance. And of course, thank you for tuning in to this episode, and hopefully I'll see you in the next one. Bye.